For many a year, my friends and I used to do a Halloween maze. And for several of those years, we had this awesome monster house painted front door flat with this window above it. And it occurred to me that it might be neat to supplement that awesome painting with an eyeball looking down at those visiting the maze. The original version was built in Vegas, and it's a 2D animation moving around several 2D layers in synchronization. But I thought it was time to update this for Hitfilm and make this a fully 3D eye. So let's make a spooky 3D Halloween eye in Hitfilm Express. And here we are in Hitfilm Express 2017. Let's go ahead and make a new project. We'll make that 1080p and 24 frames per second, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit Start Editing. The first thing we're going to need to do is design the texture for our eye, so let's go ahead and create a new composite shot. And we're going to make this 500 by 500 pixels. We'll leave this at 24 frames per second, and we'll leave the duration at 30 seconds. Let's go ahead and rename this Texture Comp. Hitfilm doesn't have any built-in guides or alignment tools for snapping, so let's go ahead and create our own. The first thing we'll do is create a new grade layer, and on the grade layer, we're going to add the grid effect. Open up the controls for point 1, change the position to 0, 0. Open up point 2 and change that position to 24.5 by 24.5, and we'll change the border radius to 1.5. We'll move down to color and change that to green. And we'll double check and make certain that the blend mode is set to none. Duplicate this grid, and on the duplicate, change point 2 to 245, 245. Change the color to red, and change the blend mode to normal. We'll use this grid as a rough guide as we start drawing masks later on. Next, we'll come up to the layer properties and change the properties for the alignment grid layer to add. Let's create a plane. We'll leave it at 500 by 500 pixels, move this underneath the alignment grid, and rename this to Iris 1. Next, we'll come up to the masking tools. Select the circle mask, and we're going to move the mouse to this intersection of these red lines. Hold down the Shift key to constrain the mask to a perfect circle. Then move up to the effects list, grab Fractal Noise, and drag that to the iris layer. We can turn the alignment grid off for now. We'll need to play around with the settings in Fractal Noise until we get a texture we like. We'll start by dragging open the type of fractal noise. I think I'm going to go with fluid. Twirl open the transform settings and lower the scale. 20 looks pretty good. Then let's open up the appearance settings and adjust the exposure and the offset. We're going to want this layer to be pretty dark. We'll set exposure to 0.2 and the offset to -0.35. Then we'll open up the colors and change those. We'll go ahead and leave color 1 at black, but for color 2, let's select a yellowish orange. And I'm going to change that offset to about -0.15 instead. I like that better. Next, we'll duplicate the fractal noise. Close the first copy, twirl open the second. I'll change the seed to something else, anything else. Twirl open the appearance settings, and change color 2. I want this to be a little bit more yellow and a little bit brighter. We'll move to the blend mode and change that from none to add. And now that I see that, I think I want these colors to be a little bit darker. We'll come up to the search tab, type in color to isolate those controls, and I'll just change the value of both the color 2s to about 128. let's duplicate the Iris 1 layer and change the name of the top copy to Iris 2. On the Iris 2 layer, we're going to twirl open our mask controls, open up the transform controls for the mask, and change the scale to about 95 for now. Open up the shape controls, change the feather mode to in, and take that up to maybe 10 pixels or so. Then open up the layer properties and change the blend mode from normal to screen. Move back up to the search bar and type in seed, and we'll change the seed values for both fractal noises to new values. Move back up to the search bar, type in color, and let's change this orange to more of a pure red. And I think I'm going to change the yellow to more of a pure orange. Next, let's return to the effects panel and type in zoom. Grab the zoom blur and drag this below the fractal noise. We'll turn the quality of the zoom blur down to about 10, and we'll turn the strength of the zoom blur to a negative number, maybe negative 15. I think this darker rim is a little bit too wide, so we'll return to the mask controls, twirl open the transform, and maybe change that scale from 95 to, we'll try 97. 97 is too much, 96. Return to the effects panel, type in para, grab the parallax effect, and drag that to Iris 2. We'll twirl open parallax and just crank that depth all the way up to 200. Return to the effects panel again, type in glow, and drag glow to the Iris 2 layer. We'll turn the intensity of the glow up way, way too high, adjust the threshold, turn the radius down, and once we've got the glow isolated where we want it, we'll turn the intensity back down to something around 0.7. An eye needs a pupil, so let's go ahead and close up the Iris 2 layer. We'll return to the media bin, grab another copy of our existing plane, and drag that into the composite shot below the alignment grid, and turn the alignment grid back on. For the pupil, instead of using the circle mask, we'll use the pen tool. Move up to a point at the top of the grid, click and hold the left mouse button and drag horizontally a little bit. Clicking and dragging the mask point creates a Bezier curve, while a quick click with the mouse creates a hard corner. We're going to want to adjust the tangents, so curves are what we're looking for. We'll go ahead and close the mask up and adjust these points a little bit. Turn the alignment grid off, and continue refining these mask points. Next, twirl open the mask properties, come down to feather, and change the feather strength to about, let's try 5. And we'll go ahead and change the roundness to 2. Now it's time to create the sclera, or the white of the eyes. We'll move to the composite shot properties cog, click that, and let's change the dimensions of this composite shot to 3000 by 1500. This time, we'll create a new plane and click the Match Timeline button. And I'll go ahead and make this plane 50% gray for now. We want to drag this plane below both the iris layers and rename this Sclera. Return to the effects list and find Fractal Noise. Drag the fractal noise to the sclera layer, twirl open the settings. We'll go ahead and leave the type as clouds, but we'll turn the scale up a little bit more, maybe to 350. Return to the search bar, type in color. For color 1, we'll select a bright yellow, then manually change the saturation to 16 and change the value to 220. Select color 2, grab a cyan, change its saturation to 16 and change its value to 220. A good monster eye needs some monstrous veins, so we'll return to the effects list and type in lightning. Grab the lightning and electricity effect and drag that below the fractal noise. We need to make some changes to the lightning, so let's clear the search bar, close the fractal noise, and twirl open the lightning and electricity. First, we'll twirl open the glow and turn the glow opacity all the way down to 0. We'll open up the core and change the core color to something like a pinkish red. We'll also need to change the blend mode of the effect from add to normal. Now, because of the way the lightning works, even though we have turned the opacity of the glow down to 0, we're still getting a little bit of color bleed from the blue. That's making our red lightning kind of purplish. To take care of this, we'll just come down to the glow and turn the radius all the way down to 0. Next, we'll move to the base of the lightning, grab this point, and drag it all the way to the left edge. Now, we just kind of need to adjust the lightning to get more streaks. We'll take the number of trunks up from 1 to about 4, and grab the end point and move that to about the center of the pupil. We'll twirl open the end controls and turn the radius value up. Then it's just a question of playing with the settings until you get something you think looks kinda cool. That's looking pretty cool. We'll click on this lightning and electricity and rename this to Veins Left. Hit Ctrl-D to duplicate the Veins Left effect, and we'll rename this to Veins Right. Twirl open the controls for Veins Right and change the start point from -1488 to 1488, 1490 or so. And we'll just go ahead and change the seed on the other side so that both these sides aren't the same. And maybe play around with 0.2 a little bit. And now our eye texture is looking pretty good. There's just one last thing we have to adjust. As we scroll the playhead through, we can see that our lightning is animating. I don't think we want the veins of our eyeball changing with every frame. So we'll make certain that we have our sclera layer selected, move up to the search bar in the controls panel, and type in speed. This brings up the speed controls for the lightning filters. And if we change this value from 1 to 0, now when we scroll the playhead, our veins remain static. That completes our texture. Let's turn this into an eyeball. We'll need to make a new composite shot, which we will name Eyeball. Change the width to 1920 and the height to 1080. We'll go ahead and leave this at 30 seconds in length and 24 frames per second. Hit OK. We'll create a 3D point. We'll name this first point I, X, tilt. Duplicate that point, name the bottom one I, Y, pan, and parent X tilt to Y pan. Yes, we just built another yoke rig. Next, we'll drag in the texture comp, move up to the effects list, search for sphere, and drag the sphere to the texture comp. Twirl open the sphere controls. We'll want to leave the source as surface texture, but we can take the radius up to about 450. Come down to position and set the transform from to I, X tilt. Then we'll twirl open the surface texture properties and set the scale ratio to 2. Now that we've changed the scale ratio to 2, our eyeball is facing the wrong way. This is easy to fix. We'll just open up the transform controls for eye Y pan and change its Y orientation to 180. There it is. Let's return to the texture comp layer, open up the illumination controls, and set the type from none to comp lights. That didn't really do anything because we don't have a light in our scene yet. Let's create a light. We'll twirl open the transform controls for the light, and I'm going to change the X position to 1000. I'll change the Y position to 2500, and I'll change the Z position to 5000. Then I'll come back to the texture comp layer, return to the sphere effect, and twirl open the material properties. I want to adjust the diffuse, specular, and shininess until I'm happy with it. I think I'm going to leave the diffuse at 60, the specular at 25, and the shininess to 100. Our eyeball's looking pretty good. We're ready to animate this. First, we'll return to the effects list and type in bulge. Grab the bulge effect and drag that to the texture comp layer. We want the bulge to come before the sphere. We'll twirl open the bulge controls and adjust the radius. We want the radius of the bulge to affect only the iris part of the eye texture, up to the point just inside this dark rim. For this texture, a value of about 267 seems to be correct. And with the bulge effect in place, by adjusting the value of the bulge parameter itself, we can get our pupil and iris to dilate. We can go from pretty wide open to a pretty narrow cat-like slit. And of course, with our yoke rig setup, we can get the eye to look left and right by adjusting the rotation value on the y-axis of the Y-pan point, and we can get the eye to look up and down by adjusting the X-rotation on the X-tilt point. Let's enable keyframing for X-rotation on the X-tilt point. Next, I'm going to hold down the Control key on my keyboard and double-click the control parameter in the Controls panel, which immediately opens up these controls on the Timeline panel, with our initial keyframe here and waiting. Now, I'll just step through the timeline and create some keyframes. When I want the eye to be static, I'll use the Toggle Keyframe button to create a new keyframe, and when I want the eye to move, I'll move the playhead and input that new value. Once I've created all the animation keyframes for the X-tilt layer, I'm going to select all those keyframes and change them from linear to smooth. Next, I'll go to the Y-pan point, return to the first frame, activate keyframing, control double-click, and once I've created all the keyframes for the Y-pan point, I will also grab all of those and convert them to smooth. I'm going to return to the first frame of the animation, activate keyframing on the bulge effect, control double-click to open up that parameter, and again, I'm just going to step through and assign keyframes. And again, once I've completed all of the bulge keyframes, I'll go ahead and switch those to smooth. And here's what that animation looks like. And now we have a spooky Halloween eyeball that can look out of your house and track trick-or-treaters. The neat thing about this is it's all procedural, so it can very quickly change the look of the eye just by going back and changing the texture comp. If I want a different color, I can change the colors of the fractal noise. I can change the glows to get different flecks. I could change the pupil mask from a slit eye to a pure circular mask if I wanted more of a human-style eyeball. I could change the color of the sclera if I wanted to. I can change the color and amount of the veins. It's all procedural. For the original eye I did for Halloween Hootenanny, I think I generated about 1.5 minutes of animation, making sure that the first and last frames were pretty much identical so that the animation looped. A friend of mine made up a 5-minute sound loop, which I put behind the eye, and then I looped the eye animation and the 5-minute sound until I had about an hour worth of video, which I then rendered out to DVD so that we could just have that play back through the TV all night long. But wait, there's more we can do to this. Let's make this a little bit more Eye of Sauron. I'll return to the texture comp, open up the sphere effect, and I'm going to take the radius down from 450 to 350. This shrinks the eyeball. I'm going to close up the texture comp, and I'm going to rename this layer to Eyeball. I'm going to duplicate the eyeball layer, and I'm going to change the bottom copy and rename this Fire. On the Fire layer, I'll open up the effects, twirl open the sphere effect, come down to illumination, and I'm going to change illumination from comp lights to none. I'll move up to the radius and change this from 350 to 360. Move up to the effects list and grab the zoom blur. I'll leave the quality at 100, but I'm going to turn the strength up to about 35. Return to the effects list again and search for heat. We'll grab the heat distortion, drop that below the zoom blur, and open up the heat distortion controls. I'm going to turn the distortion amount up quite a lot and adjust the scale until I get this kind of cloudy look happening behind it. Come back up to the effects, grab another zoom blur, and drop that below the heat distortion. The second zoom blur, I'll take the strength up to about 15. I'll duplicate my heat distortion and drop the duplicate heat distortion below the second blur. For the second distortion, I'm going to turn the scale up and the distortion amount back down. Return to the effects panel and look for Gamma. I'll drag the Gamma below that heat distortion, twirl open the Gamma, and I'm going to drop the blue, and I'm going to raise the red. Finally, I'm going to add a glow. As usual for me, I'm going to crank the intensity way up too high, adjust my threshold and my radius, and then once I have the glow where I want it, I'll turn the intensity back down to something sane, maybe about 1.5. Come back over to the new layer panel. I'm going to create another grade layer, and I'm going to move the grade layer in between the eyeball and fireball layers. We'll rename this grade layer to Light Wrap. Return to the eyeball layer, come up to the effects list, and search for the Light Wrap effect. We'll drag that below the sphere and set the source layer to Fire. And then I'm going to turn the radius up from 20 to about 80. I think I'm going to add one more heat distortion effect to the Fire layer. Type in wind speed in the search bar, and I'm going to change the wind speed for all of the 3 heat distortions so that they're all moving at slightly different speeds. I think I'm also going to change the wind direction a little bit as well. Maybe make one of those 10, one of those -10. And while I'm at it, I'm going to adjust the noise speed as well. And I'm going to do that in the inverse of the wind speed. So my slowest wind speed will have my fastest noise speed. I'll make that 2. My center will have my center. I'll make that 1.5. Clear the search bar, and that's yellower than I want it, so I'm going to return to my gamma. And I'm going to pull the green down more, and I'm going to turn the blue down more. And I'm also going to go ahead and move that first heat distortion effect before the first zoom blur, and I'm going to move the second zoom blur to after the second heat distortion. I'm going to go ahead and turn the eyeball off for a minute. I just kind of keep tweaking with this fire layer. I'm going to add a fractal noise, change its type to smoke, change its blend to overlay, and I think I'm going to move that, or to multiply, and I'm going to move that before the gamma. Maybe instead of multiply, I'll make that soft light? Maybe hard light. Hard light. Transform that layer, scale it up a little bit. And I just realized that the source layer on the light wrap on the eyeball layer should be set to layer 6. The light wrap layer not layer 7, the fire layer. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the light wrap, lower the radius, duplicate the light wrap again, lower the radius, and change this third one from lighten to screen. And actually, no, on that third one, I think I'm going to turn the radius back up. And at this point, it's just playing with the eye until you're happy with it. I've gone ahead and changed my one light to a key light, and I've added 2 more lights. So I've got a fill light here on the lower left that's red at a lower intensity. I've got a rim light way back here hitting just the back of the eyeball at an even lower intensity, and that light is yellow. And just adding a little bit of yellow rim light here and a little bit of red light down here on the initial shadow side. It just kind of blends this entire thing into the fire a little bit better. And here's what we have so far. It looks pretty good. Again, you could just continue playing with this, refining things until you're happier with it. I think I would immediately go into all the heat distortion effects and turn diffusion strength down to 0 for one thing, because the diffusion's starting to blur out that background. And I'm going to go play with this some more in HitFilm Pro. And here I am in HitFilm Pro 2017. I won't go over everything I did to make the final version of the eye. I'm just going to kind of walk through this briefly, and by now you should be able to figure this out for yourself. So the first thing I did is I replaced the duplicate of the eyeball that I was using to generate the fire with a simple masked circular plane. This took a lot of load off of HitFilm because it was calculating the entire eye animation twice and then applying effects on top of that, and it just kind of occurred to me that that was silly and wasteful, and why was I doing that to HitFilm? So let me turn off the actual eyeball layer, and I'm going to turn off this raise and distortion grade that you can see up at the top, and we'll just take a look at this updated fire. So the fire is starting with this simple masked circle. It's really not that much different from what I already showed you. So I will turn off these effects. So this fill color effect isn't needed because I started with a white circle to begin with. This fill color still exists because I took the original effects stack that we've already discussed in the tutorial and copied it and pasted it to my new white circle. So I'm going to turn that off. So then I added an angle blur to push that vertically a little bit. I added a heat distortion to change the shape. I added a zoom blur, but I moved the center of the zoom blur farther down towards the bottom. This lets the zoom blur push everything farther up and out, making it a little bit more fiery. Then we've got another heat distortion layer, then another zoom blur, again with the center point moved lower. And here's where we get into why I moved into HitFilm Pro. I've added an auto volumetrics effect, which is available to HitFilm Express users if they purchase the atmospheric lighting pack. With the auto volumetrics, I just went ahead and let the filter more or less generate what it was going to do. I moved the Z position back to about -500 pixels, adjusted the light fall off a little bit, adjusted the threshold and the exposure until I got this look over here. The next thing I've added is a fractal noise, and you can see that the fractal noise is a smoke type, and its blend has been set to multiply, so that's just going to bring some texture back into this white blob that's been generated so far. After the fractal noise are light rays of an intensity of 0.05, a quality of 10, and a radius of 500. That's just to start to soften this multiplied fractal noise. Below the light rays, I put our gamma effect back on, and the gamma effect brings us into that nice fiery red. After the gamma, I added some color curves, and I dragged the black point over to the right a bit, so this overall darkens the flamey background. Then I popped in another glow, and then I added a smoke distortion. Smoke distortion is available with an add-on pack in HitFilm Express. It's inbuilt to HitFilm Pro 2017. And you could actually make smoke distortion by creating a composite shot of a smoke distortion fractal noise and then using that as a source for a displacement effect. It's pretty much the same fire that we created earlier in the tutorial. I just messed around a little bit, added a few more layers to it, tweaked things out. The most important thing is in these heat distortion effects. Let me filter for the diffusion. The most important thing in the heat and smoke distortions is that I went ahead and turned the diffusion down to 0. In the eyeball layer itself, I added a flicker effect. This is available to Hitfilm Express users if they purchase the Starter Pack add-on. The flicker add-on is what's making the eyeball flicker. You don't need the flicker effect. You could do this by keyframing the intensity of the lights in the scene, but the flicker effect was faster. Keyframing the lights would look better. And then the last thing I did is added an energy distortion effect to this eyeball, and the distortion is down at around 8 pixels and the scale's about 80.9, and that's adding a little bit of shimmer to the eyeball itself. And then the last thing I added is this raise and distortion grade, so let's take a look at that. The raise and distortion grade has its layer blending mode set to add. I'm going to change that back to normal so that we can talk about how I built this. And I will turn all these effects off. I started with the threshold effect. The threshold effect reduces a layer to black and white, and what I was after was isolating the pupil layer. So then I added an invert effect, and that more or less reduced this to the pupil and a few little dark spots where things were underneath the threshold. So to get rid of that, I added a blur. And the blur has reduced the pupil area to this little gray and white slit. Then I added a gamma effect to colorize the slit to green, and then added the auto volumetrics effect. The volumetrics effect uses this ray point layer as the light position. Ray point is parented to the eye-Y pan, and the ray's point layer is set 500 pixels or so back in space behind the eye-Y pan layer. Basically, I'm putting the imaginary light source at the back of the eyeball so that it projects out through the iris. Then I have a fractal noise effect. The fractal noise is set to a smoke type. Its blend mode is set to multiply. And the seed has been keyframed to animate a little bit. The purpose of this fractal noise is to try and make the beam coming out of the iris look like it's shining through smoke. Then I added 2 glow effects to bring back some brightness, and change this blend mode from normal to add. Add your sound effects, and we're done. And there you have it, a spooky, fiery eyeball ready to stick in your window for Halloween to scare the heck out of some trick-or-treaters. Hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Hope you found these techniques useful. I'm Mike Miller from Triumph Visual, and I'll see you next time.